Hello everyone, welcome. Welcome to this Supply Chain Sustainability School Lunch and Learn on collaborating to deliver carbon and cost savings. I'm EJ Allen, so I'm a consultant for Action Sustainability and I'm also sector manager for the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I'm going to be chairing this session and John O'Ayton, Sustainability Manager at Willmott Dixon, is going to be talking you through the case study. Just before we get on to the interesting bits, just wants to go through a little bit of housekeeping. If we just do the next slide, please. That's great. Yes. So due to the size of the audience today, what we've done is we've taken the liberty of muting your microphones and turned all your cameras off. So apologies for that. So if you do have any questions that spring to mind as we're going through, please use the Q&A function on there to write down your questions. And then when Jono's finishes presenting, we'll be picking out some of those questions and we'll have a chunk of time at the end to go through Q&A. Please leave your phones on, an unusual request, but what we're going to be asking you to do is use your phones to do some polls using a platform called Menti. Don't worry, there's no apps or anything you need to download. It's fairly straightforward and simple, so we'll explain that shortly. And lastly, slides and the results of the polls will all be shared with you afterwards, and we're also recording the session as well, so we'll share the links to the recording and the slides afterwards to save you having to write lots of copious notes. Yeah, so without further ado, I think that let's hand over to why we're all here. So Jono, over to you.
Thanks, EJ. Hope you can all hear me okay. So I'm, as EJ just said, I'm John O'Ayton. I'm a Senior Sustainable Development Manager at Willmott Dixon. And I've been with WD for nearly 6 years now. And in that time, I've sort of spent a lot of time working with our supply chain partners, subcontractors, how we call them, to help them on their journey to decarbonisation. So thank you for giving me, the opportunity today to talk through our journey, and more importantly, what that means for all of us, going forwards, collaborating to help our partners and subcontractors on their own carbon journeys. So in this sort of lunch and learn slot, I'm going to talk you through the business benefits, which I suspect most of you hopefully already know. I'm going to share more of our story and the work we did, and then we'll finish with sort of a bit more about what you can do and maybe how the school can help. So as EJ mentioned, please check questions, any questions you might have as we go through, just bang them in the chat and I'll pick that up at the end. But I just thought to start with, I'd like you to fill out a couple of poll questions. So I'm just going to skip to the next slide. So if you take out your devices, that could be a phone or on your computers, and if you go to menti.com, type that into your browser and then enter that code. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen in a second and I'll talk you through the questions. So give you a second to load into that. So first question, how many of you work for a company that has set or are planning on setting an absolute carbon target? That doesn't have to be one aligned with science-based targets. See those numbers going up.
If for some reason you're still not on the platform, the code and the web platform link is still at the top of the screen there, so you can see that if you're not yet in there.
How many have we got? How many have we got joined? So I know, do some quick mental arithmetic.
We've got about 60 at the moment in total.
Okay. I'll give it 20 more seconds before we go on to the next poll question. Looks roughly like 16 or so have set a carbon target, good to see, and 20 are planning on one. Okay, so this would be a good webinar to help you with that. Okay, so question number 2 is, do you know how you can help your company achieve that carbon target? So whether that's one you're working towards or whether the one you've already been set, and do you feel you have sort of the skill set or the ability to actually help reduce carbon within your company? Lots of blues, good to see. A couple of no's and a few not sure's. So what's that, 30, 40-ish, okay. Fab. Okay. And then if we move to the next one, please, Sophie, the last one. So do you think carbon or decarbonisation is taken seriously enough in your company? Now, I'm not here to sort of name and shame. I think the results are all anonymous, obviously. So please just be honest. I think I'm more interested and curious in knowing the extent of the challenge maybe before us. Okay, that's good to see. Fab. Okay, that's really useful for me as I'm going through this. I'm going to come back to that at the end in a little bit more detail. I presume I need to share again, Sophie.
Yes, please.
Okay, hopefully you can all see my screen again.
Yep, we can see that.
Fab. Okay, so let's get started by looking at the why we should all be thinking about carbon footprinting and decarbonising our businesses. I'm not going to try and bore you with all this, as I suspect most of you already know, but the messages we're all receiving on the state of the planet are unequivocal. Their customers, along with their communities, they're listening to these messages, and rightly so. Their needs and expectations are changing. The science tells us, we've got 9 years to avoid potentially catastrophic climate change. It tells us or shows us that what we do in the next few years will profoundly affect the next few thousand. And we all have to respond to that. Flames are beginning to lick the edges of our platform. The world is on fire, literally, I think, when I was putting this together. And our ability to succeed and grow, depends on what we do now. I think particularly in light of the pandemic, that system level shock has made us, it's really aware of how fragile our way of life is, when faced with a future which is so unpredictable. But I think it's also reminded us that necessity is, the mother of invention. And actually people are capable of great change when it's needed. But I would caveat that with, global carbon emissions fell by what, 7% in 2020, due to the pandemic, and only 7%. So, we really need to start changing the way we address carbon, as we're going to blow those, global carbon budgets very shortly. So if you haven't started to think about how this affects your business and how you need to change, then, it really is time to start now. What does all that mean, I guess, and where should you start? So I've just sort of listed 6 things to consider, which I'll run through quickly. So firstly, start treating decarbonisation as a business opportunity. There are companies now making money from carbon or carbon dioxide. Unilever, for example, I think they've introduced laundry capsules, made from CO2. Secondly, understand your organisation's true carbon footprint. That's what I'm going to cover in more detail today, but only by understanding your total carbon footprint across your entire business can you identify your largest sources of energy use, and then use that information to identify key opportunities to save on cost and carbon. Thirdly, make sure you're driving decarbonisation across your whole value chain. Look at how you can incorporate carbon removal into product strategies, your supply chains, the embodied carbon and materials. Think about design for deconstruction. Even the virtuous sectors, need help. Electric vehicles, for example, they've all got batteries that need recycling rather than being sent to landfill. Fourthly, what are the interventions you'll need to achieve your goals, and how are you actually going to deliver those carbon reductions, which again, I'll go into in a bit more detail today. Number 5, well, it's clues in today's title, I think. And lastly, you need to ensure you've obviously got the systems and processes in place to shout about your achievements, record your carbon footprint, report back to your shareholders, board, stakeholders, etc., to monitor progress against the target, which is where the school and the tool will link in nicely at the end. So what has, I guess, I and Willmott Dixon done that might be of benefit to you, or you could learn from? So way back in 2015, long time ago now, I carried out a spend-based hotspotting analysis that highlighted that out of our scope 1 and 2, 3 carbon emissions, Willmott Dixon accounted for just 1%, and the other 99 came from our supply chain. Now, this in itself was a useful insight, as we've been pouring resources and time into our scope 1 and 2 emissions, which at that point was costing us about 10 mil in spend. Fast forward to 2020, 2021, we had reduced our spend by nearly 60%. Now, that was just focusing on the 1%. Imagine what we could do when we target the other 99%. So we sort of looked at analysing that data a little bit further, and actually, in this case, I separated out ground workers, who, as you can see, make up 20% of the pie chart with regards to their total carbon emissions in the supply chain. This again indicated to us this was an area we should be focusing on. You all know ground workers are, as a trade, are inherently diesel intensive. So what do we do with that knowledge and insight? Well, firstly, it gave us the ability to actually target the top 10% of our carbon intensive supply chain partners for the first time. We engaged with 5 partners, I think ground workers, M&E, and a dry liner or plasterer. And this sort of work involved nearly a year of working out where their carbon hotspots came from, investigating, understanding their data, and baselining their business operations. I worked with a range of people from across their business. It's, commercial directors, fleet, transport operators, office staff, and HSE personnel. We initially did this piece of work as part of the Carbon Trust Standard, the supply chain standard, sorry. And sort of the end result, or the goal, I guess, was to create a report that identified interventions for each company or each business to implement. And that was going to demonstrate cost and carbon savings of between 20 and 30% of their energy spend, with crucially paybacks ranging from immediate to a couple of years. So as this sort of journey over the 6 years went on, we then had to demonstrate the interventions we had identified in those reports had actually been implemented by the companies and had actually caused a reduction in absolute carbon. Now, we ended up working with just 2 by the end, and both of them actually achieved carbon and cost saving reductions of around 20%, which was great for them, obviously. And I'll be honest, a lot of what was actually achieved in those early days was sort of the low-hanging fruit, so I call it. It's sort of the easy wins and didn't require enormous change in capital costs or resources. Those savings are going to come later, but that was 20% still, so that was huge. So I'll briefly talk you through one of the sort of reports / interventions we did, and I've actually taken this pie chart from one of our ground worker reports that I carried out. So starting from the top, you can see the site operations in dark blue makes up obviously the majority of the spend in the form of red diesel. And this particular ground worker had a big fleet of vans, the rest, as a typical partner might have, small transport vehicles and office electricity. So focusing in a little bit more on site operations, I analysed those telematics reports from their plant machinery, which consisted of a standard range of diggers, excavators, dumpers, etc. And the analysis indicated that on average, their plant machinery was sat idling for 42% of the time, which was consuming about 225 litres per month per machine. And then obviously if you aggregate that up over a year, that's nearly 200k spent on idling, which certainly got their attention. So we then sort of, this is the process of you're taking that raw data and then what do you do with it? So I then ran some percentage reduction scenarios to indicate how much they could save if they set themselves some targets, combined with sort of maximising the use of eco mode, which then obviously starts producing some big cost and carbon savings. Now, this isn't exactly rocket science in terms of setting targets, but using the data, the insight, setting those targets really helps drive performance and efficiency and sort of focus the minds, I guess. So alongside looking at plant machinery, I also analysed their fleet, sort of the transport. In this case, we're just looking at vans on this scenario. So this table models 3 scenarios over time to illustrate the cost and carbon savings to the fleet if those carbon intensive vans were replaced when their lease expires. Now those caps you can see there are probably on the higher end now, given what we're procuring hopefully, but the premise is still the same. So each scenario replaces vans based on their grams of CO2 per kilometre rating. So if the vans were sort of higher, grams per kilometre higher than the given cap, I then selected a more carbon efficient alternative. It could still do the same job, and that was a suitable replacement. So those cost and carbon savings effectively represent the savings to the business if that replacement van had driven the same mileage that year. Now this scenario, as I've mentioned, could be applied to any partner or any business. Just thinking back to for Willmott Dixon, we've always had a cap on our company cars of 120 grams per kilometre. And I've just introduced or helped introduce a new policy stating that we're not going to be paying business mileage or commute mileage to our most polluting vehicles. So probably not very popular at the moment. And I'll quickly share a funny story from one of the supply chain partners I was working with. I'm not going to name, but when I was investigating their fleet, I saw they had a certain fondness for Ford Mustangs, which is a great vehicle if you're Jeremy Clarkson, but it's terrible for the environment. And when I asked, why were you procuring Ford Mustangs, their response was, one of their workers sort of had a bad back, and the Mustang was the only vehicle they could drive. You could imagine my sort of amusement and horror at this, in all truthfulness, unless you have the data that described how much carbon, diesel, etc. those vehicles were using, you don't question decisions like that. Obviously, there's more suitable vehicles that could be used. You get my point. So what else did we find? I'm not going to go through everything I've listed here, but there's some other key points you could sort of take away. I think it's also probably worth pointing out that whilst all of this will help contribute towards reduced carbon and cost, there are also other health benefits, air pollution, improving air quality, especially in urban environments. So that was probably the sort of the output of what we did, but I also wanted to share, I guess, my actual experience of this process. What I learned and what we learned and what we thought was going to happen versus what actually happened. So those 5 companies I mentioned we work with, they were small, lean organizations, similar probably to many of you, I suspect. And you may not often have the luxury, let's call it, of a sustainability professional advising you what to do and how. And, at the beginning, it was a bit of a mess. It took a long time to start capturing basic data, pulling it together to report on annual carbon or energy spend footprint. There's fragments of data were recorded here, there, everywhere. It was, excuse the pun, it was a right labyrinth. I guess I thought, going in, it'd be really simple. Ask for how much diesel they spent last year and what the litres were. I think we take for granted in our bigger organisations that we have the ability to capture monthly emissions, and spend. And so it was a really painful experience gathering all this data. But I guess what we learned is that it didn't matter if they didn't have the right expertise. All that was needed was an open mind, a willingness to collaborate. The interventions identified weren't rocket science. It just required the right approach, the right data, and with time on our side, we were able to, really cut through that labyrinth and offer these organisations and businesses useful insights and information to add value and meaning. So I just wanted to share the final, recommendation with you and highlight what we ended up with at the end. When we started the journey, most organisations didn't realise how much they could actually save from doing this process. And it is, it's a struggle to get most on board. But when I share slides like this, it seems like a no-brainer. So that figure at the bottom of 158K, that represents 30% of one organisation's total energy spend. And as I mentioned, some of the interventions, they're not exactly rocket science. You can see them there. It's pretty basic stuff. But, it takes time to do all that and pull the data together. And it took us nearly a year and a half to pull that together. And I know technology has obviously increased tenfold and continues to increase. Thinking just what we're doing at the moment, looking at HVO fuel as the red diesel rebate ends in April. All of that's a step in the right direction towards electrification, obviously. So what's next? So at Willmott Dixon, we've pledged to have a zero carbon company without offsetting by 2030. And as part of that, we're working closely with all of our partners now to help them implement carbon management plans, especially to reduce diesel. But we've also pledged that by 2040, our supply chain is going to achieve net zero operational carbon too. So to do that, we're working closely with the Supply Chain Sustainability School, helping provide guidance on how organisations can decarbonise, promoting, encouraging all our partners to sign up to the school and start capturing their carbon and energy data in their new fabulous tool. So remember back to that slide I showed a while ago, outlining the 6 items to consider regarding decarbonising the business. The tool, the school's tool, that will help you on your, I guess, to start your journey, calculating your carbon footprint, and then you use the outputs of the tool as a reporting and monitoring tool. And I guess it doesn't matter at what stage you are on the journey now. I always think back to what someone told me, the words of, I think it's Voltaire, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Get started, act today, and then you can constantly evolve like we have over the years, and then, improve your approach as you learn. So I guess as a sort of the last act before I sort of wrap up, before we head on to some more hopefully engaging Q&As, I just wanted to run a couple more poll questions again, just to see whether any enlightenment. So if you open up your polls again, hopefully you've still got them to hand, and I've just got 2 more questions, I promise. So 2 questions here. I'm asking exactly the same question again. I'm just intrigued to see whether anyone sort of feels like they know now how they can help their company achieve their carbon target if they weren't sure at the beginning. And then lastly, that's good to see. 33, so 4 not sures, okay. That is really promising. I feel like there was a few oranges or no's at the start of the webinar. I can't remember whether EJ, you can remember what the numbers were on the first poll. Reflect back, but that 37 is really good to see. So I just wanted to finish on the last poll question, where I'm sort of asking, you know, what are your biggest barriers for decarbonisation, maybe from a personal point of view or from a business point of view? So I think it's hopefully be a word cloud this. So I'm happy for there to be sort of an awkward minute's silence while you take time to sort of have a think about, you know, what it is, and then hopefully we can build on some of these in the Q&A. So what we're seeing coming through here: time, cost, classic ones. Data collection's a good one. Hopefully you see why the benefit of doing it. There is benefits to doing it, but appreciate it takes time and resource to do it. Fab. Okay. I'm just writing a few of these down now before we hopefully stop sharing the slides and go into a little bit more of a Q&A. I haven't seen any. I need to have a look at the questions that have come through in a second.
Actually, Sophie, you can probably leave that slide there for a minute, actually, because it might help to leave that during the Q&A. So, Johnny, was there anything more for you before I open it up, before I start picking some questions?
No, that's it from me. Thank you very much for
Brilliant.
listening.
Fantastic. I thought that's a really good, kind of fantastic way of highlighting the financial and kind of procurement incentives around less carbon equals less cost. It's that big opportunity there. I think the first recommendation you came up with was treating decarbonisation as a business opportunity. And what stands out to me is just looking at 50% reduction in idling time, with savings for the company, you were looking at, you know, £88,000 a year, which is huge. So I think a first question, really, so some of the questions that come in is, what was the initial response when you first started working with these organisations? What was the initial response to your supply chain partners around this challenge? And what you're seeing coming up here as the biggest barriers for decarbonisation, is that what you were hearing from the companies you were working with? And how did you tackle that?
Yeah, it's a good question from, I think it's Ben. I'm just reflecting on, so I mentioned we obviously identified that top 10% of our top carbon emitting supply chain partners, which ultimately was based on spend. And actually one of the top ones was a dry liner and plasterer, and we engaged with them, and actually they didn't really want to have anything to do with us. So that was a kind of a bit of a, okay. So we actually struggled to get good engagement from our partners, because at that point, you know, I didn't have these lovely slides to show how much savings there were potentially to offer them. So hopefully I'll share it with them now and see how they feel. But on the flip side, we worked with a couple of the other companies, and they were actually really keen to get on board. I think they recognised that I was effectively offering them a free resource. You know, they had effectively us as Willmott Dixon as a free consultant to do the work for them. It wasn't easy for them because I was bombarding them with questions and trying to get to grips with where on earth their data was coming from and who dealt with it. So I'd like to say that we had a mixed response from partners. I think some were keen that they, you know, everyone's keen for, you know, helping assist with climate change and sustainability. But I think as the sort of journey goes on, you do get a little bit more traction and a bit more kind of hesitancy about, oh, this is actually taking quite a long time. We haven't got the resource for this. And that's where we really had to sort of push through and use, you know, we had the MD's approval right at the start from all these companies. But I ended up, you know, working with the sort of the more junior roles. So there was a little bit of back and forth there. So yeah, my advice, I guess, is make sure you've got sort of high level buy-in to sort of carry out this approach, if you're doing a similar thing to me. But if it's for your own company, again, make sure your senior leaders are on board and you can now demonstrate that there is cost and carbon savings associated. So good question.
Okay, thanks. So we had a question. I think you've already answered this, but just to make sure, somebody said it takes a long time to capture all that data. You just mentioned that. And I think you used the word a labyrinth when you're starting to try and collect data, find out what's already there. I take it you didn't have, it was just kind of you. It wasn't a separate consultant to help you and the companies do this. Is that right?
Yeah, it varied with every single partner. So some partners already had carbon consultants working with them, but I kind of sort of ended up guiding them with what they should then be asking. I know, every company collects data. It's just how you're currently collecting it and why you're collecting it. And we often found a lot of them were just sort of paper invoices that didn't really get stored anywhere. Obviously everyone pays for diesel invoices, but it's what you do with that data. Does someone have a way to record it? And then suddenly after 12 months, you can actually then build up the bigger picture. So it was a combination of me trying to find where they stored that data. And that was probably about 60% of the work, which sounds ridiculous, but it was just fragmented all over the place. And then there was probably maybe 30 or 40% of the work was saying, actually, we need you to start recording this data for the first time. And obviously that then, you've got to put a process in place. For one of the companies we work with, they were already looking to work towards ISO 50001. And to achieve that, you need to have a good handle on your data. So they were keen to do that.
You want to clarify what that ISO standard is? Just
sorry, yeah, ISO 50001 is, I think it's the energy management strategy. So that's the standard for calculating your own energy footprint, alongside the 14001, which is more around having an environmental standard.
Okay, and I think the same person had also asked, did you build this data submission requirement into contractual requirements? I don't think you did. It sounds as though it was working with the willing, where there was that MD kind of buy-in to, yes, we're going to tackle this together. So honing in on the carbon side of things, we had a question. Did you look at life cycle carbon assessments? If not, are you going to be looking at that going forward? And also, could I ask if you could explain a little bit more about the carbon reporting tool that you mentioned as well, so that everyone's kind of familiar with what that is?
So I'll deal with the big question first, which is around the life cycle carbon. Now, the answer is no, we didn't, because we know that's the big beast. As sort of highlighted in that, that first pie chart, scope 1, 2, and 3. I know all the carbon's tied up in scope 3 and embodied carbon, but ultimately this was the sort of easy wins, just understanding companies scope 1 and 2. So we discussed it with them, but at that stage, they barely had a handle on their own scope 1 and 2. So that was the focus. Now, a lot of the work we're doing now, with those goals I set out for the 2040, working with our supply chain partners with the embodied carbon, this is where we're dealing with it. But do I know how we're going to do it yet? I'm going to be honest, not quite yet. We're starting with working with a few of our partners. So we work with, Willmott Dixon has set strategic or mandated partners we work with, who provide all our goods. We work with thousands of partners, but we're going to focus on the core sort of 10 or 20 who provide all our goods. And the way we sort of do that is we work through our sustainable procurement policy, which you can find on our external website. Now that lists the requirements that Willmott Dixon set and which we adhere, or we want our partners to adhere to. And within that, we've sort of got industry leading standards that we want them to sign up to, which is, start using EPD to measure embodied carbon, recycled content. All of those are included in there. And we're starting that process of how we engage with our partners now and start gathering that data, because I put myself in the same position as when I went out to some of our partners for this work. We don't capture that data yet. We sort of ask for it, but we haven't started capturing it. We have no idea of how big it is. We know it's huge. We've started doing a lot of work on concrete, building up how much carbon does concrete and cement contribute to, because we know that's a big sector. Hence why we focus on ground workers. So I guess my advice is if you focus on certain sectors, you can sort of break down that big pie chart. So that's a good question. Second part, you mentioned about the carbon reporting tool, EJ. Is that the schools tool you're talking about, or one?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, the carbon reporting tool, the schools carbon reporting tool.
So for those not aware, the Supply Chain Sustainability School, working in collaboration with the Climate Action Group, we've made this sort of online free carbon reporting tool. And I know a lot of the major contractors probably just about to send out a letter to all the partners we work with, all the supply chain partners we work with, asking you all to fill this in. So rather than all of us asking you all individually to report your carbon data. We're going to use this one central source as a sort of starter for 10, where every single supply chain partner we work with will start entering their carbon emission data. So that'll be it's as simple as, how many diesel litres did you use in 2021? And then at the end of it, there's sort of, you can apportionate out your spend for how much you spent with Willmott Dixon or Balfour Beatty or whoever it might be. But the key thing for me is this will be the first place where actually we can sort of look at Scope 3 emissions as a whole. And hopefully it should be a nice, easy, they built it so it's nice and simple for you to enter all your carbon emission data. So it'll start asking you questions you might not have thought about before, or energy you might not have thought you have. So think back to that pie chart I showed you of that ground workers. You got your site operations, and then you've got your transport, and then your offices. So that tool will then help guide you, I guess, starting you on your journey for carbon footprinting.
Great, thank you. And we've got I think I've got a slide at the end. There's a webinar coming up to bring you up to speed on how to get involved in using the carbon reporting tool, which is free. So worth having a look at that at the end. Okay, moving on. We've had a few questions about HVO. And what's been your experience of HVO around efficiencies, and do you see this as being a long-term solution? What's your view on that, Jono?
Yeah, sort of HVO, I guess it's taken me slightly by surprise. It's probably, biofuel's been around for a long time, hasn't it? And HVO I think it's become mainstream maybe from the start of last year. So HVO for me is a stepping stone. It has to be. It's a stepping stone towards electrification. And that is my kind of core view on it. So obviously we could switch all of our diesel right now to HVO. I think it works in the majority of machines. Check obviously with the OEMs, but that sounds like the easy win. That will deliver a carbon reduction of 90%. However, HVO is not. It's a finite resource, and we're already seeing issues with supply and demand. We're seeing issues with responsible procurement, sustainable procurement, in Asia, I guess, where palm oil and the associated black market that's unfortunately being driven by the West demand for HVO. So I think you have to be very careful with who you're procuring HVO from. Make sure you're going in wide open and asking for the POS, which is proof of sustainability. That will tell you exactly where that batch of HVO has come from. And make sure you're sourcing it in line with the international standards. I think it's the ISCC, something like that. Can't quite remember it, but if you Google it, it will give you those standards. So when you're asking and using HVO fuel, if you're procuring it in line with that, then that's our view, and Willmott Dixon is looking to just roll out HVO across all of our projects, and we'll also be looking to work with our supply chain partners so that only they use HVO as well. But like I said, the most important thing is to remember that is not the final solution. You're still using a resource. It's expensive. The main goal is how you can get connected to the grid as quick as possible, and obviously as that grid becomes more and more renewable, that's where we're heading.
Yeah, great points about that. Yes, that responsible sourcing side of things to do with HVO. I know that the school has got a paper as well that we can share when we send the slides out to everybody, that kind of summarises alternative fuel options. So we can look at that later. Yeah, so another question about kind of plant and heavy machinery, and how do you see new technologies as playing a role in kind of reducing carbon?
So I guess I'm hoping that all of you on the call will guide me with the new technologies of what plant and heavy machinery can actually do. So in my mind, I know we're not quite at the stage yet where there's fully electric JCBs and diggers. There's some on the market, but I guess in my head, for Willmott Dixon and what I'm responsible for is that by 2030, we will have an electric fleet, or we'll be a zero carbon company, which obviously means we won't be using any diesel in any of our plant machinery. Now, there's already things being trialled around hydrogen and electric cranes, diggers, etc. on site. But there's the bigger thing for me is working with our ground workers, especially. This new machinery costs a lot of money. If they've just bought a new diesel a couple of years ago, you can't expect them to suddenly turn around and buy a new one. So we're going to see a phased approach over the next 3, 4, 5 years where more machinery will come through. I don't think we're in a position, maybe even by 2025, whereby we'll be able to switch fully to electric. But that last 5 years will be crucial. And I like to think that people a lot cleverer than me are probably designing some technology out there there'll be new batteries, etc., where this machinery will be able to handle it. So I'm quietly confident, whether it'll be hydrogen or electric or something else, that by 2030 we'll be able to have this on all of our construction projects. Absolutely.
And then a kind of question specifically about the Carbon Trust Supply Chain Standard. Can you explain a little bit more about that if somebody's interested in what is that and how do I get involved?
So we were sort of one of the pathfinders of working with the Carbon Trust. They have multiple standards. They offer them for sort of carbon, energy and water. And back in 2015, they released this new Carbon Trust Supply Chain Standard, which was in the name, was a specific standard for measuring your own company's supply chain footprint. And it uses a spend-based approach. So effectively, you'll look at all your spend on your supply chain. And then gives you carbon calculations. I know Qantas is another company out there who offer similar services. And effectively, the crux of it is you can calculate your carbon footprint of your supply chain by going, right, we've spent X amount on these partners, and say they're a dry liner, which is kind of quite carbon intensive. The Carbon Trust and Qantas, etc., they've come up with these carbon calculations. They'll say, right, for a plasterer, you'll apply this conversion factor. So you multiply the spend by the conversion factor. So it is driven mostly by spend. Obviously, if you spend loads and loads of money with one partner, they'll probably be higher on your carbon footprint than others, but those conversion factors are weighted. So we sort of went on that journey with the Carbon Trust Supply Chain Standard. We did sort of levels 1, 2 and 3. And I think they're working towards a new standard called the value chain, but I know there's other companies out there who offer similar things. And we did it as kind of twofold. It was a good exercise and we wanted to be the pathfinders for it, to be the first to do it and to claim we were doing it. And it's great to have the accreditation. But there's a lot of things you can do within your own business to start calculating your own carbon footprint as well.
Okay, thanks. So we've had a few questions from organisations who I'm guessing either are in your supply chain or would like to be in your supply chain. Question around how important is the kind of carbon agenda in winning or securing projects? And I suppose I'm interested to know, are there any sustainability initiatives big question, that you're kind of mandating for your key supply chain partners? Sorry, big question there.
It's a really good question, because we obviously help with a lot of the bids and tenders that we work for. And I would love to know whether we won a job based on our responses to, being a carbon neutral company for, the past 8 years and, reducing our carbon emissions by 60%, etc. Obviously, we don't get told that. However, what we do know is that all the bids and tenders we're now going for, all the questions that are coming through from all our clients and customers, they're all asking for us to demonstrate what are your net zero ambitions, what are your embodied carbon ambitions, demonstrate how you're reducing your approach to climate change, how are you mitigating. So you can just see the way the market and the industry is going. So we need to be addressing this. So part of all the work we've been banking this up since sort of 2012, 2011. So we're in a really good place now to be able to answer all this. We've been doing it for a long time. We know what we're doing. I saw someone's sort of question coming through. Do we use online platform tool for collating and analysing carbon data? We have our own internal. We built our own system basically with an IT company, and we're quite lucky in this approach. So the data we pull together that our board sees, we can trace that back all the way down to an individual project's litre of diesel batch. So that's sort of what we use as our monthly reporting tool. So every month they have to report on all the diesel use, all the electricity, all the gas use. That then gets checked by all the environmental sustainability managers. It then gets fed through to my team, the group sustainability team. We then report on that data. And at the moment, I've been having a big drive of looking at our diesel use. Why are we using diesel here? What are we using it for? And it's back to this whole picture around, use the data, use the insight, and then tell the story. I think I saw something on LinkedIn around, you can imagine getting a load of Lego pieces. You can sort of have a load of Lego pieces all jumbled up, doesn't mean anything. You could sort it into colours. That looks nice, probably doesn't tell you too much. But then actually, the end of it is you turn those Lego pieces into a house, and then you've got the story with it. And that's kind of what we use. That's why we build. That's why I ask all our teams for this data, because it is a pain and it takes time. But once you get to that picture of a house and you get the insight, that's where we really have the value added. So if you haven't already, recording your carbon emissions, there's lots of tools online, but equally, you can start small and build it up within yourself. and sort of build those reports I shared from these slides, and it will, I can guarantee you'll save those 20-30% savings straight away.
And from my perspective, a link to the question about how important is reducing carbon to the winning and securing projects. So from a school perspective, you may have seen that we've got 135 partners now who are part funding the school, so it can be made free for yourselves. We've seen more partners join in the last 18 months than we ever have before in any previous year. And one of the biggest drivers for that is around the net zero, the carbon agenda, and the recognition that clients, contractors, home builders, their carbon impact lies in their supply chain. So they need to be working with their supply chains and upskilling and collaborating with you to help reduce that carbon, which they need to be doing. Okay, so we've had a few questions for Jono. Some organisations will be really keen to see your procurement policy. I'm sure we can share that. There's links to that. I think it's all publicly available, isn't it?
It's all publicly available on our website, yeah.
Yep, so we can share that when we send out the slides. And somebody's asked about recommendations for a driver training course. I know the school's got some resources that we can share on that, but I don't know if anything springs to mind on that, Jono, based on the work you did. We can follow up with this afterwards.
You've probably got better ones now. I mean, the one I looked at was probably 4 years old, but when you're looking at that, we look at using telematics. Make sure you've got those sort of telematics data, where you're sort of monitoring the idling time of cars. It works for those with bigger fleets, because they're obviously relatively expensive, so you see bigger savings if you can extrapolate it up. But there's lots of good stuff available now.
Okay, I've seen one last question that I'm going to share, which is, I'm surprised it didn't come up earlier on. So as a specialist subcontractor, we're competing against other companies that don't include any of this, and we're finding that cost is still the primary factor for winning work. Yeah, are there work packages that offer a carbon neutral solution being chosen over a package that doesn't? I suppose it's that age old, how does that actually work in the tender process? So a difficult one to finish on, but yeah. What's your views on that?
I think that's the really hard one, and I think it's a gradual trend now. So we're only looking to work with partners who are committed to this, and I know that's from a Willmott Dixon point of view. And a lot of the standards through our procurement policy, and even just to work for us, we will be requiring this of you. And I know other companies will start asking for that. I think it can be very frustrating. Well, it is very frustrating when you're sort of doing all the good things, yet others aren't, yet they're winning more work. But I think what will happen is you'll see the benefits after a while. We've been sort of on this carbon neutral journey for 8-9 years, and I was talking about it, but we've sort of been reaping those benefits all the way through. So a lot of those cost savings I mentioned, that will just come straight out. That'll be adding to your profit, those 20-30%. And obviously it helps to win work. But I think come COP26, and I know in time there will be a lot more stringent tax regulations on companies. I don't know what they'll look like yet, but there's talks at the high level about what happens if companies don't adhere to this. So I think the faster and the quicker you put yourself in a position to be able to record all this, the better position you'll be in for the future.
I recall having a conversation with a groundworks organisation a few weeks ago who was saying, I get the sustainability agenda, but I can't get my MD to buy into this. And I talked through some of the numbers that Jono's just shared around this case study. And they said, you know what, if I go to my MD with these figures around potential savings, he'll be like, right, off you go, do your best. So I think it's really important to be capturing any case studies, especially where there's a clear business benefit, and sharing those. The school can help you share those. If you have case studies like that, please come and talk to us. We'd love to hear about them. Sophie, can you move on to the last few slides, please? Yeah, just to finish with, I just wanted to kind of signpost you to some of the things that the school's got that can help you with the topics that we've talked about today. So some forthcoming training sessions we've got in the next few weeks. We've got the webinar, the introduction to the climate action carbon reporting tool that Jono talked about earlier on. Again, all events for the school are free. We've got the operational embodied carbon, the UK contractors declare webinar, one on greening the fleet, and then if you don't know what science-based targets are, worth having a look at that lunch and learn in October. Many of your customers or competitors will be signing up to those science-based targets. Next slide. Yeah, so these are just examples of some of the Cpd Accredited E-Learning that we've got within the school. We've just updated the Sustainability and Groundworks E-Learning module. So for groundworkers out there, have a look at that. Something that's to flag up as well is we're currently developing some learning pathways for ground workers, and those are likely to be going live before Christmas. So again, we'll alert you all as and when those are live. Yeah, so you've got a range of climate change and carbon introductory level e-learning modules right through to the more kind of intermediate level, which is around carbon reporting. And there's one there around air quality. So again, if you're a business with lots of plant and equipment, certainly have a look at that one. Okay, next ones, please. And then we've also got a range of on-demand learning. So these are webinars similar to this that we've run in the past that you can access at any point via the school platform. So hopefully lots of resources there for you, and we'll send some links after today's session. But I think that's almost drawn us to the end of the session. It's 1:45. I think we said we'd finish now. So before you do go anywhere, please do share your feedback via the feedback link that's included there, or it will pop up on the screen when we finish. But no, thank you very much, Jono. Fantastic to get your views and input, and to have that case study to share is brilliant. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, and see you at a school event soon. Thanks.
Thanks all. Bye.